Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Managed Security Services webinar brought to you by the MSI's Outreach and Growth Program for Shared Technology Services. My name is Carrie Davey. I'm the Communications Manager for the MSI, Capgemini, and I am here at the AT&T offices with a crew of charming folks who are going to talk to you today about our Managed Security Services, Security Monitoring and Device Management? Yeah, there it is. So let me go on to my next slide here to give you an overview of what we'll be talking about today. We have Pat Robinson from AT&T, we have Richard Overfield, David Wood, also we have Jean Moore and Marcus Montemayor in the room. So we have plenty of experts here. If you have any questions throughout the seminar, you are able to use our chat function or our Q&A function. If you joined the event by your computer, you also should have the option to raise the hand, which would allow us to unmute you so that you can ask your question over the phone. With that, let me move to my next slide here, which does, again, list out the folks who are here in the room with me. And that's pretty much my intro, gentlemen. We will wrap up the call today with some more information from my side, but from here, I'm handing it on over.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi.
Thanks for having us. Pat Robinson here. I'll kind of MC the conversation as we talk through a series of services available on the MSS contract, affectionately known as Managed Security Services. We all call it MSS for short. Can we go to the next slide? Mm-hmm. We'll cover today security monitoring and device management. It's very easy to say if you practice. It's one of three broad categories of services. The other two categories, incident response, risk and compliance, we'll cover at a later date. But today we want to talk about two different groupings of services, and we can go to the next slide. In these categories, we have security monitoring, which is composed... Sorry, I forgot the obligatory disclaimer.
I do have a request to be a little bit louder so everyone can hear you.
Got it. Yes, what would a webinar be without a disclaimer? So all of the services today are standard offerings through the MSS contract, but through the interactions with Richard Overfield and David Wood and their teams, we develop what are called requests for solutions, and these are the customer-specific custom solutions for your particular situation. So as we talk about these, just know that we'll hit some of the highlights, but there will be some elements of customization unique to every individual customer. So now we can go to the next slide, which should talk about the three broad categories. Today, we're discussing security monitoring on the far left and device management, its next door neighbor. We'll cover the three different categories of security monitoring and the 6 different categories of device management. So let's move on to the next one, Carrie, and we'll talk about the SIEM service. And one of the words you'll hear us repeat time and time again today is service. All of these technologies are offered as a service. So we'll talk about this from the point of view of we're delivering to you a security information and event monitoring service. I'm not going to read the slides, but I'm going to ask Richard Overfield to give us a little context and background on why SIEM is a relevant service for this particular contract and what caused it to be one of the first items that was of importance to DIR. So Richard?
Sure, thank you. A SIEM service is basically a process of collecting information from systems throughout the organization and correlating that information to identify unwanted, malicious, policy violations, those kinds of things that you don't want in your environment. This tool and service is designed to find that in your environment and then to alert you on that activity.
So what's an alert? Do you call me at home, call me at work, send me a text?
Well,
Telegram.
All of the above?
We work the service based on the customer's security policy, right? So they'll help us define what's critical, what's high, what's low, what's medium. as far as a criticality of an event or series of events or activities. And then based on their policy, we will alert them as they need. So for a high or a critical event, it may be that we need to call out until we find a warm body to answer the phone so that we know that somebody can look at it. For other things, it may be an email or even a text. So we can support all of those.
Okay. So
No telegrams.
No telegrams.
Telegrams are supported.
And no carrier pigeons? Oh.
Ravens is a...
So David, you've kind of been involved with this
Absolutely.
particular project since its inception. So what was the genesis of how we get to where we are today?
Well, actually, I was a customer of AT&T at one point, and then now actually work on this side of the fence to actually develop products and services that are of value to the state of Texas, right? So in the beginning, we worked very closely. I worked very closely with AT&T for the services for the state of Texas NSOC, right? Network Security Operations Center through DIR. And then as a product of that, I came over to AT&T and then worked through various AT&T partners and products and services to evaluate and come up with a platform and a service that would be of value to the state under that environment. And then as we move forward into the future, through this current services contract, we were then able to take all of the lessons learned, all the information, all of the requirements that we gathered over the years, and then make this a more broadly developed service so that it can be consumed by customers across the state.
Ah, cool. So basically, on my first day with you, I get your 10 years or so of intelligence, experience, understanding.
Right.
Correct.
Yes. So a lot of the value here is that we know the state from being here in the state for a number of years and providing SIEM services at the NSOC, but we also get to leverage, global AT&T, which has a lot of backbone, a lot of monitoring of the internet, and we can leverage that intelligence and bring that to the table.
Expertise as a service.
Absolutely. and the most perfect segue that just occurred. The next slide, Carrie, is we talk about threat research. So, Richard, I'm going to loop back to you here then, because what you're really talking about then is the collective intelligence of a variety of sources of information under this threat research service. Then tell us a little bit more about what you were just alluding to. All of this knowledge gets poured out in buckets upon me, and I have to figure out what's important, or do you tell me what to duck?
Well, once again, this is a service, right? So we're not going to, flood you with all the bits and pieces of intelligence that we run into. We're going to be targeting that intelligence towards your environment or your specific need or want, right? So typically what this is a service where we will look for activities by known bad actors, threat agents, threat actors that are interested in your specific environment or environments like yours, because that's typically how an aggressor operates. Is they'll have a target type of organization that they understand and try to exploit, or they have that type of company or organization has value that they can monetize.
Wow. So the criminal element has become specialists.
Well, we see threats from nation states to organized crime, all the way down to the hacktivists who are just trying to make you look bad.
Wow. And this is like a subscription service, so like Hulu or something else.
Well, and depending on what you're looking for from the targeted research, you may choose a different subscription length. So typically, if you are concerned about a particular incident, or you think you are being targeted, a short-term 1 to 3 month kind of investigation where we will focus on that particular activity in your environment makes sense. For a company who's trying to deploy a new service or a new web application or mobile application where you're likely to get more attention, we may be called in to help you before you roll it out and then right after it for 4 to 6 months to kind of help you understand how to secure this thing. For things over a year, now what we're really talking about is just augmenting the intel for your standard SOC operation, right? You want to be able to get data every day.
Richard, you are the master of the next lead-in because, would you believe it, the next slide is called SOC as a Service. So, Carrie, why don't we just kind of advance on? For those of us who have SOC envy and can't afford one, David and Richard tell me there's a way that I could rent a security operations center.
Our SOC as a Service, this is a service which is primarily focused on providing expertise, people on site at your location to either build a SOC, to be a SOC, or to augment an existing SOC. In this case, we're providing expertise that maybe you don't have, or that you need additional from a perspective of an existing SOC.
So, David, then, if I had part of a SOC, or maybe 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, but not full eyes on glass, could you help architect something?
Right. So let's say you can operate, you have all the functions that you need during regular business hours, right, 8 to 5, or whatever the case may be. If you need augmentation beyond that, so maybe after hours or on the weekends, or you just want more during regular business hours, that can be provided as well. So we're able to provide, either complete coverage as needed or as needed coverage if you've already got some of that already taken care of.
Oh, so if I have some tools today, but maybe not enough,
right,
you could kind of weave what I own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So you could do a couple of things. You could these individuals can use the tools that already exist with the environment. We could couple the service with other services from the MSSP to be able to then give you that full coverage that you need. So not only the resources from the service perspective, but also on-site resources to support the ongoing operations internally within your environment.
So as I travel around the state, I encounter more than a few people that don't have even the beginning of a SOC operation. Mm-hmm. Could you help someone just from absolute scratch start?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so these individuals can then go and build your security policy or develop the technical requirements for your environment. They could actually be the subject matter experts for your environment if you had, let's say, you need someone to come in and assess. So you may want to get some of the GRC services on there as well, but you don't necessarily have the expertise in-house to even work with a GRC type of a service, right? So they can serve in a number of different roles. That's completely dependent upon what the customer needs day to day.
And since this is a service, the skill sets provided can change over time. So if you're in the beginning and you need more help on just building policy and procedure, we can bring in those experts, and then as you move into a more mature and you need specific expertise for a technology or to monitor or what have you, we can retire the first group and bring in new folks and hold on some of that. We get that leverage of having been there and built that.
Wow. So I move and evolve over the course of the relationship, and it's still a service.
Right.
But the first question to my mind is, something like this is probably not a trivial expense for my organization.
Well, that's a great point as well, because we did get our first question in the chat, which is, how are the services priced?
Oh, my goodness. Well, thanks for asking. Yes, each one of these services that we've discussed to date is a custom configuration, and the price for every person will more or less be different. Part of the process, and we'll touch on this toward the end when we hand the show back to Carrie, and we talk about this process we referenced in the beginning called a request for solution. And that's the formalized process in which you ask us, how much does that cost? And we interact with you to determine, well, how much do you need? And so it's very much, Carrie, an iterative process that we get to. So I do not have a
price list.
Yeah, I don't have a price list.
Actually, you do.
Oh, do I really?
Part of the contract, it's out on the DIR website. They can go download that as part of the contract. Now, the prices in that are AT&T prices to DIR, and then the MSI and DIR have their administrative fees and stuff that add on. But for planning, it will give you some idea. But just as a high level, SIEM is priced per device. So, and we don't differentiate between a security device or a network device or a server, what have you. A device is a device, and you pay the services priced by device. The threat research is a subscription.
Okay.
And depending on how long you want it, it's a different price per month. It's a monthly charge. For the SMDM, the SOC as a service, that is a true RFS process. That's a request for solution, and that will be custom based on what you want, how many people we think collectively you need to have on site to provide that service. Okay. Those kinds of things.
Wow. Okay. Good.
So thanks for the question.
Yes.
Right?
Thank you
Keep
very
them
much.
coming.
So, Carrie, let's transition over to device management. We have a series of 6 items we want to discuss. The first of which is managed endpoint security. So, Richard, let's touch on endpoints. There's zillions of them out there. Mm-hmm. They all have some state of disrepair or concern. So in this interactive process, how does the customer come to you to get help to protect their endpoint?
Well, again, it's the RFS process. If you want to have this service, you'll put in that order, and we will work with you to discuss on how that's going to be sized. But this particular is about your endpoint security, your antivirus, and our service will work with you to get the agents installed. Once they're installed, we will monitor and manage those. We'll update those for either software updates or patches or filter updates, those kinds of things. And of course, we will monitor what comes out of that. So you will be able to get reporting on, systems status, whether or not they've been updated, et cetera, et cetera. And anything that we find or monitor as far as viruses and things that are removed or quarantined.
Good. So I have a question for you, and it relates to the phone call I had before this, talking with a law enforcement organization, and I just happened to ask the question, how frequently do you update the endpoint security software in the laptops of your police cars? The answer was, well, never. So would you help the organization like that keep up with?
Well, one of the things that the service provide is a current status of any endpoint. So once it's registered, we can run reports saying, these 32 haven't been updated this week. These are a month old, and these haven't been done since we installed the agent. If that's
in a past life, some of these endpoint deployments have been very expensive up front. The capital equipment to get it started. We keep mentioning services. David, this is, how much upfront is there associated with something like this?
So all this is paid per month, right? So how, again, this is priced by the device, right? So however many devices multiplied the number of devices by the rate, and then that's how you'll get the rate, a monthly rate for that. And then we'll make sure those endpoint agents are updated, and then provide that reporting on a regular basis out to whomever needs it. So it's not like there's only one individual this has to go to. If there are multiple individuals that need that information to make business decisions down the road, we'll make sure that information gets to the right place.
Okay. The last time I worked on one of these projects, it was like a 3-year contract. So is there some sort of expectation of a multi-year?
No monthly minimum, right?
So if we'll do the contracts, and we'll do costing to estimate out 3 or 5 years, but the bottom line is you can cancel this service really at any time, and we just effectively, we pick up our toys and go home.
Wow. So pretty impressive that it's none of the heavy capital is associated with this.
Correct.
It's a month-to-month relationship, but you're putting all of that intellectual thought into the setup, the design, the monitor, the management. So chances are most people would want to hang on to that for a while.
Well, it's a model that we certainly believe we're bringing value to, that once we provide it, the value will be obvious and will continue on for the long term.
Okay.
But it's nice from the customer's perspective to know that they have an option to move on to something else if they need to.
Wow. Now, is there a scenario in which the customer already has some investment in an endpoint service, but day-to-day management has just become cumbersome? Is there...
Right. So we provide this as a service. The technology is not the critical piece. We obviously have our system that we will install and monitor. If you have something different, we can support that and manage, a different endpoint security solution. Pricing is slightly different, but that's...
Okay. There's some flexibility there.
Mm-hmm.
So David, when the RFS, the request for service,
Sure.
flows to you with respect to endpoint and for that fact, all the other services, then you work with the customer to help determine whether they want to keep or discard any current?
Correct. So some of the key components of the RFS is that we'll work with the customer to identify what it is that they actually need. If there is existing infrastructure or hardware, software that needs to be incorporated into the service, then that's a different type of service, and we'll make sure that's identified, scoped appropriately, and then priced as it needs to be. If we're leveraging kind of the AT&T deployment framework, where we're leveraging best-in-breed products that we're bringing to the table to ensure kind of consistency across the board, and that lowest price point that we can get to for the contract, then that's what we'll provide and then price that appropriately. So it really comes down to getting in that RFS, allowing us to work through that process so that we can create the solution that needs to go forward into the agreement that we come to. So again, if we have to leverage existing infrastructure, we'll do that as well. But it's something that we'll work through with the customer as those RFSs come through.
Wow. Okay. So a high touch, high customization, month-to-month relationship. Just a sidebar. Does this exist anyplace else in the world of tech companies and organizations? Is there any place else where you can?
Not that I've seen. I know that there are a lot of organizations looking at the state of Texas contract in envy.
I can name a couple of states, David, by the way, that are...
But yeah, as far as this is fairly unique for the state of Texas, DIR really did negotiate a very good contract for the state agencies, and so we're happy to provide that.
Okay. Well, as we kind of traverse around through the network from the SIEM and all of the devices that it monitors to the Security Operations Center to endpoints, Carrie, let's go to the next slide and talk about the next service. And it's really funny. On Friday, I had a conversation with a customer who has purchased several things off of this contract, and what made us laugh was his first words regarding host-based IDS was, "What piece of equipment do I get?" And so, Richard, I want to pivot back around to the concept of a service so we can kind of chuckle at that concept of...
Well, again, this is a service. As David mentioned before, we've gone out in support of this contract to find best of breeds for each of these device management solutions, things that work well together, that is efficient for us and effective for you as a customer. So our solution is for us to use those best in breeds. Again, to Pat's point earlier, we can support an existing system. So if you have something that's inside, if you already have something, then we can support monitoring that.
Okay. Well, that brings up an interesting point. What if I don't have host-based IPS today?
Mm-hmm.
Could I use this RFS process, David, to interact with you to determine if I even need it or what benefit there might
Sure.
be?
Absolutely. Just because you create an RFS does not mean that you have to conclude that RFS with a purchase, right? There are plenty of RFSs that come through where they're looking to determine whether or not there's something that is needed and what can be done. Ultimately, the customer is paying for an outcome, right? So we have all of these services, we have many products and processes and technologies and people that are working behind them. But ultimately, those technologies may change, right, year to year, because we find there are some emerging in the market that are better, or that are a better value for the state, etc. Ultimately, though, the customer pays for an outcome. If they're utilizing the standard services that we are providing. If we do leverage existing infrastructure, or if you all have a specific vendor that you like and we need to leverage that, obviously the prices are a little bit different, but we will support that as required. So whenever you come to the RFS, we'll go through all that, make sure that the solution fits, and then if you're comfortable with the solution, then that will conclude in a purchase.
And I just want to just kind of summarize, for all of the device management services, we provide the hardware, we install the hardware, we will help initially configure the hardware, we'll monitor and maintain that hardware, which means alerts and events coming out of that, we will track and provide alerts. We will update the software if it's a system that has filters or definitions that it uses. Those will get updated as appropriate. And to David's point, if at some point, 3 years down the line, it's time to refresh these systems, we do that. If we decide that the best solution is to replace it with something else, next best in breed, we'll do that as part of it, and it's all service to you.
Wow.
We'll also decommission it as well. So,
okay.
You will not have systems piling up in your data centers or in your closets, right? Once the service is complete, we'll remove it, dispose of it. If there's other requirements on there where we have to ensure that data destruction, things of that nature, if those need to be part of the service, then we'll get that into the RFS process and make sure those are identified and taken care of.
Wow. So then, Richard and David, at the risk of overusing a word that marketing departments overuse on a regular basis, the experience of security as a service is radically different from the way that we've largely run our businesses for the last 20 years, where we shop the market, buy a device, import the device, figure out how to run the device, forget the device is in the network and let it run stale, and then it becomes a point of exposure. This whole experience has now changed for the customer, pretty much across the board. A question for both of you then, with respect to both the host-based IDS-IPS and our next slide, network-based IDS-IPS, do you help consult with me, the customer, on policies and tuning so that I can get the absolute maximum, I can bring all the capability out of that?
So typically we'll come with a best practice solution are designed to a best practice, right? So we're looking at the Texas Cybersecurity Framework, we're looking at TAC 202, we're developing those configurations to meet those requirements predominantly, right? Beyond that, we are a security organization. We look at NIST 853 and the other NIST cybersecurity frameworks to be able to then leverage that expertise to bring those configurations to bear. So by and large, if you're consuming the service as the standard AT&T service that we provide, you're already going to have a configuration, a service that comes with a configuration that works for the majority of your requirements out there. Once we do get with you, if there are other things that are specific to your environment, then we'll understand those and get those into the process so we can update that configuration once that system does arrive and is installed.
Wow, cool. So, Kerry, let's go on to the next slide. It's kind of a run-on sentence with respect to host-based and network IDS/IPS. But Richard and David, I think my first question for you is the harmony of having both in one system as a service. Could you kind of speak, and again, I hate to wear out that word, experience, but what's that experience like to the customer?
So regardless of if you're using network-based IDS/IPS or host-based, obviously there is a difference in one's deployed on the network and one's deployed as an agent deployed on the endpoint. But as far as the experience goes, it's pretty much the same, right? We'll come with a service that is deployed to your systems or your network, as the case may be. It'll be already configured to meet the majority of the requirements that you're going to face on a daily basis. We'll ensure that any of those things that are specific to your environment are cared for. But when it comes to the end customer experience, what you're going to find is we're providing you an outcome. These are going to be things like alerts on things that we identified that are external to the service that need to be addressed. These are going to be reports on how systems are functioning, how rules are behaving, and those sorts of things. So then you have the information at your disposal to then make security decisions for your environment. So rather than having to be a host-based IPS or IDS expert or a network-based IDS/IPS expert, you can focus less on the tool and more on the security posture of your agency. Therefore, you can respond better to your executives and you can respond better to your constituents, right? Because ultimately, we all serve the citizens of the state of Texas.
Wow, okay. Kerry, let's migrate on to the next topic, firewalls. Again, the concept of firewall as a service, that's kind of I don't know, as I travel around the state talking to customers, that's kind of a strange thought process to go through. But what you're really talking about is just that. To your term, David, the outcome that a firewall brings to an enterprise or to a network is the service, Richard, that you and David help the customer replace an existing or perhaps aging firewall, or help manage that big behemoth that we just bought that we didn't realize we don't know how to run, kind of thing. So Richard and David, would you guys kind of like to talk a little bit about, again, the experience and process of how you help the customer?
Yeah. Okay. So again, everything begins with the RFS, right? If you request managed firewall, then if you're selecting the service where we provide and manage all that for you, then it's a pretty straightforward process. We'll identify predominantly what the inputs are to that system. So let's say you've got, it's operating at your network edge, but you have a lot of local networks that are attached to it. We'll need to make sure we're identifying and caring for those and ensure that the system performance is commensurate with what the network requires. Then from there, we'll identify what specific configurations will be required for that environment, and then we'll put the solution package together. If that meets the needs, then that will end with the purchase. That's the RFS process in general. And then from an operation and delivery perspective, Richard, you want to go over that?
It goes back to what we said earlier. The service provides that management of the device. So if you need a rules change on the firewall, those rules change, they come to us, we deploy them, right? So you don't need to be a firewall expert. We're going to update those systems, patch them, and of course we're going to manage and monitor those for health and uptime, as well as making sure that the patches are all in place.
Wow, I can name a school district, David, that would hug you. They spent about $250,000 on some firewall upgrades, and in 6 months they were beginning to error out because someone else had doubled the bandwidth into the district.
Yes.
and the current system could not keep pace with the expanded environment.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because as we configure those systems, we put certain thresholds on them as far as utilization goes. So on a regular basis, we'll be tracking growth in the network, identify the health as it relates to growth, and then let you know when, okay, the solution that you requested is now at 80% capacity, and then we can assist it. Ultimately, you will have to do some capacity planning for the agency, because that's a much broader discussion, but we can provide inputs to your capacity planning and assist you with that process as well, so that it's not a giant question mark that you might have as you go forward with communicating that to your leadership.
Oh, that would have been a godsend for this particular IT director, because he now had to go back to the school board and explain why he needed to ask for another large quantity of money to fix the mistake of the last quick decision. So, Carrie, let's move on to the next door neighbor for managed firewall, web application firewalls. Again, we've kind of used this word effectively, service. So hopefully by now everyone realizes that a physical piece of equipment might arrive at your destination, but it's a service. So, Richard, let's talk about web application firewalls. Why and what benefit and how? And David, maybe you can talk about how you interact with the customer.
Sure. Well, a web application firewall is, as the title implies, it's designed to help protect a web server, web application, or some other web presence, right? So it's built for that specific. And again, cool. we start this as a service. We will provide an additional or initial configuration based on the requirements that David was talking about earlier, and we will manage, monitor, keep it updated, add any definitions that come along, and of course, all of these services get an ongoing tuning process. So as we alert, as we notify you of things, you may come back and say that, well, that's just normal operations for us. Well, that's what we consider a false positive. We can then configure the system so that we don't alert you on those kinds of events going forward.
And a little bit more to that configuration process too. It's you get the benefit of all the other AT&T customers that we're configuring any of these systems for, web application firewall included. So whenever we see something for one customer, we can then adjust all of the solutions that we're managing for our customers to meet that threat or the vulnerability that we see in the environment, to ensure that that threat vector is effectively removed from as an attack vector for our customers. So.
That's interesting you should mention that, because earlier in the conversation, Richard said something about deploying something you've never deployed before. So here's kind of that inflection point, Richard, where we're about to turn up an application and we really don't have a good baseline if there's going to be 8 users or 80 million. It could be the next Game of Thrones, or it could be my father-in-law. We just really don't know how to scale. So can you help us through that thought process?
Some of this comes along with that part. Obviously, we're looking to scale the solution to what is needed, right? So bandwidth is absolutely one of those scoping questions. As far as getting into the crafting of your web application, it's something that AT&T can help with. It's not strictly part of this. We have an option to go to a rate card for a lot of our services. So we can do certain custom things that aren't strictly part of a specific RU, resource unit, but otherwise fit in the security space. So it opens up another option for us to help support.
Another layer of flexibility. I'm liking this better and better. Carrie, let's move on to the last of our 6 device management capabilities. One of my personal favorites, malware. That is detecting it, not creating it. I'm hearing out on the streets these days that more and more malware is creeping into systems. People are using it for crypto mining. They're basically moving into my computing system to use my electricity and my computational power for their personal benefit. I'm still a little uncomfortable with that. So could you guys kind of talk about this experience as well?
Sure. Yeah. So with the managed malware detection, malware prevention, it's very similar to IDS, IPS, right? Network-based IDS, IPS. With that, this is a system that is deployed within your network. It's specifically targeting malware, identifying those signatures and those activities that malware generates, and then removing that opportunity for that malware to propagate from the environment altogether. So that solution, very much like we've talked about with the others, begins with the RFS process. We'll make sure we've scoped it appropriately, and then that'll get delivered to your network.
Wow. So malware, like a grass fire in West Texas in August, will spread rapidly if not contained effectively. So again, as a service, if we have the misfortune of having had a device become infected and attempt to spread, you help us stem that propagation?
That's for another time. That's incident response services.
Oh, okay. So in June, when we pick up the conversation with Carrie Davies, a shameless plug for our next presentation.
Well, and in fact, I did have a couple of questions related to that as well. So just to circle back on, Terry, I'm guessing is how you pronounce your name. Apologies if I'm wrong. We had the question, do you provide external pen testing, or do you also have internal pen testing? But that will be also under...
That's under risk and compliance, but
right?
yes, we do provide both of those services.
And when it comes to any of the other services that we provide, if you are partaking of any of the standard managed services that we're providing under like SMDM, the individuals who participate with these other services are already experts in those tools as well. So when we talk about like incident response, for example, one of our later talks, about 80% of the time and the money spent on incident response is discovery. Just dropping in, and this is an industry statistic, right? It's not me coming up with it, right? 80% of the time is just understanding where everything is and then making sure it's contained appropriately. As these incident responders come into your environment, if you're leveraging these services already, they already know these tools, and so they're set up standardly so they can understand where the various zones are, which correlate to your various network environments, et cetera, and they can more quickly get oriented with your environment to be able to contain the threat and then work through eradication.
Wow. Wow, okay.
And I do have another question that I think is also from incident response. Do we do PCI compliance testing for self-hosted applications or applications that are hosted on cloud providers like Amazon or Azure?
Yes, that's risk and compliance services. Okay. We have a specific RU for cloud compliance, and then for any of the other risk assessments that are out there, be that PCI or a HIPAA assessment or any assessment to a standard, we can support under the security assessment.
Excellent. And so if you are interested in those services, again, shameless plug, make sure you join us again in our June call where we will be discussing all of the rest of MSS.
Absolutely, and we'll answer that question everybody wants to know. When you open your laptop, Richard, and it's full of Russians, what do we do?
Where can they go in the interim if they have questions?
Well, we will. That's my section. That's what we'll talk about next.
David, another shameless plug. Let's wrap with a conclusion slide, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie so she can answer the burning question.
How to find out more, yeah.
One thing that I want to make sure that we all understand is the MSS services were designed to integrate. So if you have a SIEM service and we are managing your firewalls, if we find something that needs to be blocked, we will block it. You don't need to be involved with that. Obviously you'll be notified of all this, and we will obviously work through the change process for doing that, but it allows us to not only monitor for you, we can take some actions authorized by you in delivering the other device management services. So They're designed to be that way. So the more the more that we are doing from the device management, it allows us to be more proactive with SIEM services.
Wow.
Nice.
So the right hand does know what the left hand is doing? I think I'm in love. So Carrie, just a few quick highlights, and then I want to turn it over to you to ask the burning question, how do we get more? So just a reminder, all of these are services. They're available on a monthly subscription style model. Richard, we've talked about. David, you've talked about they're customized to the needs of the individual customer. And Richard, you've emphasized they're managed throughout their life cycle, and they're also woven together.
Mm-hmm.
So, Carrie, this is my obvious handoff to you. They can be requested through the STS portal. So
and
shall we explain?
what is that, and how do they get there?
Shall we demystify that part of this process?
So check it out, accessing more info and to request services. And this ties into the last question that we got from one of our listeners, which I am going to ask y'all this one before we go on just to see. She says, what if I don't know what I need? Can I initiate an RFS to evaluate my environment and get a recommendation for a solution? And if so, will that recommendation be itemized so that I can select the best parts if we choose to go forward with that path?
Yes. Short answer, yes. If you have part of every RFS is to do what we call an order confirmation or order verification. And basically that's us working with you. This is the service. Is that what you needed? And if it's not, we will adjust the service or we'll put you in a different one. So if you're looking for information, that is one path to do it. I'm going to point to these gentlemen over here as the other option.
And I think another part of that question was, can you assess what is needed? So we'll talk about the risk and compliance at a later date, but you can order an assessment per like the cybersecurity framework, for example, and it'll tell you where you are deficient.
So, David, I have a trick question for you. Yeah. Texas cybersecurity framework is what? Is
Sure.
it bigger than a watermelon? Smaller than an 18-wheeler?
So if you're not familiar with the Texas cybersecurity framework, this was developed by the state CISO's office. It is a list of a handful of 853 controls and others as well that you can work through to identify how my environment is living up to that, right? So it's a little bit different than TAC 202, right? There are interplays between them, but it's the cybersecurity framework that's there so that you can have a standardized way to assess yourself, right? And then we do provide assessments via the cybersecurity framework, so you can see things that might be deficient or areas where you could improve. And then based off of that, we can then recommend either products or services, probably primarily services depending on the type of deficiency. And then that way you kind of have a seamless, here's what was assessed, here's how I can improve and move myself from whatever level of maturity you're at based on that assessment to a higher level of maturity.
So it's kind of like my roadmap for my future?
It can be, yes, and that's really what is intended. So the federal government does this, the state CISO has mirrored this pretty well for the state of Texas, and that gives you kind of a way to go from, hey, where am I today on a level of maturity, between 1 and 5, right? And then where do I want to be in the future? And you can look at that from maybe 6 months out, 12 months out, 18 months out, and then based off of that, we can tell you, well, here's how you can get there, right?
Oh, cool. So, Carrie, how are we doing on...
Well, we're just in our wrap-up time. We're doing fine. We're doing fine. We've answered all of the questions. If you do have any additional questions, please feel free to go ahead and pop those into our chat or our Q&A windows. So if you have joined us on any of our previous webinars, you'll have seen the rest of these slides. This is just to point out, how do you get more information? You can access our external portal at the address that's shown there. What that is the face of our program to those people who are not current customers. Our current customers can also access this portal, but it is the same service offering information primarily as is on our internal portal. And if you do go there, you have the ability to visit our service offerings page. You'll see here that each of our service offerings has its own page, and then as you select one, like Managed Security Services, you can drill down and you'll see each of the sub-offerings within the service catalog, and you can read more about them. Now, if you find that you're reading more about it and you'd like to have more information, on the left-hand panel, you'll have this little box that allows you to submit a request for more information. Now, this is if you are a new customer only. If you are an existing customer, then you would actually go into our internal portal and begin an RFS. But if you have questions ahead of that, we can definitely put you in touch with the team and scout out what you're looking for before we initiate the formal process. If you're a prospective customer, you can select the service that you're interested in from that drop menu there. Unfortunately, you can only select one at a time, but you do have the option to put some additional details in that box at the bottom. So if you found that you were interested in more than one of the services that were offered today, you could list the additional ones in that box. We'll still make sure that you get connected with the right person on the right team. Now, one other thing, if you are a new customer, is that we do have series of contract structure that are how you do get involved, and then you would become an existing customer instead of a potential customer. There is more information about these different types of contracts on our website, but you'll see there that we have the Global Shared Technology Services contract. Then you'll have an additional program terms and conditions, which is specific to the program that you're looking at, and then solution terms at that bottom level, which outlines exactly what the service is doing for you in your company. We offer these webinars every month. As we said, we'll be revisiting Managed Security Services in June. I hope to have this same charming crew with me then, where we will talk about the remainder of the MSS services. But in between there, next month in May, we will have a similar webinar for our print mail services. You can access on our external portal the recordings of our previous webinars. Right now, we have just those first 3 available. We're having some technical difficulties posting the others, but they will be coming soon. If you go to that external portal address, you can access them under the publications section. Now, if you are already here on this call, you probably received our webinar invitation via Outlook, but you may have also seen information somewhere else. The way that we pull the list of who is invited to the webinar is those who actively go and subscribe to our mailing list. Now, we do send out our notifications to a very, very wide mailing list of participants, but only those who take the extra step of going on our website and subscribing to our mailing list will receive the invitation to these webinars. Here at the end, you will see the contact information for the Outreach and Growth Manager, Neil Pierce. He could not be with us today because he is out spreading the good word about shared technology services at a conference. There is also my contact information, and Marcus, who didn't even talk, is here on our slide as well. So if you have questions, take them to Marcus first.
Yeah, absolutely. And compliment him on his socks. They're always stylish.
Happy to help you.
And so with that, we will wrap up our webinar for today. I'd like to give a great big thank you to the gentlemen here in the room for their time, and also to those of you who've joined and listened. If you have any feedback or questions, please feel free to drop me an email, give me a call, and we look forward to talking to you next month about print mail. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Gary.